The city of Detroit begins as a military post that was founded by Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac in 1701. The post soon developed Fort Pontchartrain, the primary fort in the West for the French. Cadillac created the post to protect the French fur trade in the Great Lakes region, as is the highest source of income for the French in America at the time. Cadillac also uses the fort to ally with displaced Native Americans who had to flee from the east to avoid other European settlers. This is the beginning of Detroit's history with refugees. Cadillac begins to exercise control over the city that begins to form around the fort by selling the land around Fort Pontchartrain to French settlers. In return, he demands payment and a percent of the crop yields from the French. He also forces some of the natives off of their own land so that the French can move in, which angers many of the natives. Once many realize that Cadillac is a tyrant, he is moved to another city post.
Immigration from any part of the world came to a halt in Detroit for nearly 70 years as the region was involved in many wars. The French made it a major fort in the French and Indian War, and the English fought fierce battles for it in the American Revolutionary War. The English didn't stop patrolling the area until after the War of 1812. After this point, immigrants began arriving in Detroit and building the city up. Once peace came to the Great Lakes region, immigrants began flooding into Detroit and its surrounding areas. The first groups were the Germans and Irish, who gained strong footholds in the city economically. These groups immigrated into the region for the next 20 years. The next groups that immigrated were the Italians and Polish, who immigrated in small numbers until the Civil War. When the Civil War ended, new immigrants who were from southern and southeastern Europe, especially Greece, began arriving in Detroit. The most influential of the immigrant groups in Detroit were the Germans. As they arrived on their own accord, they came with money and were able to establish their own community just outside of Detroit with thriving businesses. As politics and war in Germany became difficult, more Germans came to Detroit and settled in Germantown, on the outskirts of the city. This community was somewhat isolated from the rest of Detroit and caused some division within the city.
The largest group of immigrants were the Irish, who came in the years leading up to the potato famine. The Irish came partially for religious freedom, as the area was isolated enough to allow for this. The Irish were especially successful in politics and government service, taking very active leadership roles in the Democratic Party and labor unions. They also excelled at dockyard and construction jobs, building numerous churches. When the potato famine did hit Ireland, many Irish living in Detroit used their salaries to bring relatives to the U.S. and into Detroit. Like the Germans, they established their own cultural identity in Detroit and their own neighborhood. African Americans, however, began arriving in Detroit just after its addition to Michigan Territory. As the territory outlawed slavery, it became a safe haven to many freed slaves. Also, as it was on the way to Canada, it became a hub of transport for the Underground Railroad. In all of this, Detroit became a safe haven for many refugees from the slave market. However, African Americans in Detroit were forced to live downtown in a mostly crowded neighborhood. This caused tensions with the other cultural groups who were wealthy and had their own neighborhoods by choice.
Final group, and most important to the novel Middlesex, is the Greek immigrant community. This group settled in what was originally Germantown. Most Greeks worked as farmers in their homeland, but Detroit lacked farmland. As a result, many had to adapt to their lives in urban Detroit. This is seen in the characters later in the novel as Lefty undertakes a job in a factory. Thus, one can see how Detroit is made up of many different cultures, similar to how American culture was becoming a mixing pot of the cultures that its immigrants brought. It was believed that this mixing of cultures strengthened the nation as it combined all of the cultures in the nation. However, Detroit proves the reality that this mixing pot only divides groups more. As the groups all lived on their own, their cultures did not mix but rather created barriers and tensions between groups. These divisions led to many tensions and race riots that endured far past the immigration era. The author of Middlesex is Jeffrey Eugenides. Eugenides was born in Detroit, Michigan, to a father of Greek descent and a mother of English and Irish ancestry. Middlesex's characters and events are loosely based on aspects of Eugenides' life and observations of his Greek heritage. Eugenides' heritage is seen throughout the novel in that Cal's grandparents migrated from Asia Minor or Greece to America, similar to Eugenides' ancestors. Middlesex broadly deals with the Greek-American immigrant experience in the United States and the rise and fall of Detroit, and explores the experience of an intersex person in the United States. Detroit is symbolic of the land of opportunities, as the Stephanides seek a new beginning because a war is raging in their homeland.
How does the combination of cultures from multiple countries influence the unique culture of Detroit as a whole? Is it ever okay to leave your country? What if it's in turmoil? Everything that happened before you makes you who you are. How is this philosophy represented by Cal's situation?